Great, thanks, Yvette. It's such a pleasure to be here. Obviously, I'm a big fan of Berkeley. I went to school here, and I work just down the street. And I have a lot of collaborators on campus, and I want to tell you a little bit about some work I've been doing in looking at urban environments, looking at cities, looking at these dynamic kind of public places as a place for research opportunities, as a place to look at very different types of computation and sort of personal technologies that people carry around. I've had a pleasure of working with a great number of people inside of Intel and outside people here at the Berkeley campus and elsewhere that have contributed to a lot of these projects, and it's been a big part of how they've developed and formed. The Urban Atmospheres is largely looking at this concept of public urban spaces of the city. I mean, this is, your cities sort of maybe look very much the same as they did, maybe 2-3 years ago. But as we all know, they're sort of proliferated with all kinds of wireless signals. They're propagated also by a number of people carrying around all kinds of sophisticated, powerful processors on their body. There's all kinds of opportunities for technology to play a role in other parts of the urban space. And so these places also are a very interesting social dynamic. And we're trying to say there are new ways of thinking about technology when you start to think about this. To kind of make that a little more clear, I'll say what we're not doing. I think it's probably pretty clear, but I'll say it for the sake of argument. We're not interested in things around the home. So this is where you're largely involved with interactions with intimate friends and family members. We're not interested in office applications or things that are even office environments where the tools are kind of developed largely around productivity and efficiency. We're not even talking about social networking. So it's not about, great, now all these people are out there in the city and we can meet up with them and we can find friends. That's not what we're interested in either. I mean, we touch on social issues certainly, but we're not looking at social applications. And maybe surprisingly, we're not actually interested in mobile technology. I mean, largely mobile technology, the way it's talked about, I kind of view that it's very nomadic. It's more about now we can sit at a cafe and read our email. Now we can actually browse the web at a park. I'm much more interested in a different kind of mobile experience. And also, a lot of the applications just bothers me to no end are looking at these desktop applications ported to your mobile phone. So if anything, this is a call to duty for all of us to change this metaphor to other kinds of interaction techniques. But there are some themes that we do want to sort of address when we think about public spaces. So one of them is people, the kinds of people that inhabit these places. We want to try to make a discussion around, well, these are largely strangers or people you don't know. It's a very different kind of dichotomy of the kinds of people that make up these places. What is the place actually we're talking about? And there's different reasons to argue, well, people have different feelings about this place or that place, or what are the boundaries, or when am I in this place, or why does it feel different at different times of day or different groups of people? There's alleys, there's street corners, there's a bus stop, there's a plaza. So there's all kinds of just dynamic range for us to talk about, and we should address that in the research. Infrastructure. What ends up, there's a lot of stuff already sitting out there, street furniture it's often called, but things like parking meters and trash cans and benches and street lights. All of these are sort of ripe for opportunities for discovering new kinds of interventions and techniques for technology to overlay and interplay with these kinds of devices. The actual theming of urban atmospheres, or urban computing, so to speak, is actually designed to be interdisciplinary. So it's designed to actually try to engage in a wide range of disciplines. And that sort of very much fits in with the CITRIS theme, in fact, which is that the problems that we're kind of challenged with today are not solely confined to one discipline. And in fact, the idea is to work with not just computer science and engineers, but architects, also artists and designers and sociologists and anthropologists, and the list goes on. But we call it architecture specifically because it has such a physical presence on streets, talking about where are the new surfaces going to be, where are these sort of projections going to appear, where are the new textures, what kinds of materials are we going to use, all kinds of discussion around architecture. And I want to draw attention back. This is kind of my sort of version of mobility, this flow, this kind of connectivity. There's things in motion. There's all these sort of transitory phases. There's waiting at the bus stop. There's stepping onto the bus. There's paying your fare. There's finding a seat. All of these are subtly different and call out different kinds of sort of interaction experiences with mobile devices and with technology in the city. So that's kind of what we're looking at. Now, actually, bring attention to a quote from Jane Jacobs. For those of you not aware, she's passed away a year ago, but she was really instrumental in changing a lot of people's public perceptions around the way city planning was done, particularly in New York. Very grassroots effort. And she says, lowly, unpurposeful, and random as they appear, sidewalk contacts are the small change from which a city's wealth of public life may grow. And the reason I like this is because it sort of touches on something that's just so simple and almost kind of everyday, but it's a real rich part of our lives. It's why we live in cities, and I think we need to keep that in the forefront of the discussion, that there are opportunities not just at things that seem like really radical new interventions. There's things that are very subtle that we can start to play on. And one of the things we've been thinking about is, well, what do we do as people every day? And this is the kinds of things that we engage in, the kinds of things that interest us, and where our sort of actual minds and sort of interests are. And certainly there's times where we're trying to be productive and efficient. And I think there's obviously reason to have a lot of debate and discussion around location services and things that'll help us. I think we all probably agree. I'd like to find a good restaurant in an unfamiliar area and make it to the bus on time. But we don't want to miss out on the opportunities for other experiences. I mean, in some sense, we are sort of, we're more than just problem solvers, right? So we're creatures of sort of boundless curiosity. And mixed within these sort of moments of productivity are these brief instances of daydreaming. We find ourselves sort of astonished and in awe of not just the extraordinary, so this is Millennium Park, the Cloud Gate, but even just the ordinary or mundane objects. So things that are just kind of everyday, they evoke some kind of mystery or doubt or uncertainty, and we start to wonder about them. We might say, how many newspapers has that guy sold today? When was that bus last repaired? How far have I walked today? How many people ever sat on that bench? So there's nothing wrong with you don't ask these questions. Some people think, oh my gosh, I'm not asking these, something is wrong. I think you get the idea that, I don't know. Does that woman own a cat? Did a child or an adult spit that gum on the ground? What is the secret life of my taxi cabs around my city? And this is a project that we didn't do. It's called Cab Spotting, but it's tracking all the cabs and their movement around the San Francisco Bay Area, sort of in a time-lapse way. I don't know, where's all the mobile phone traffic going on? This is a project called Real-Time Rome by Carlo Ratti, where it's looked at activity and sort of clustering of cell phone calls. The big spike you see was the moment that Madonna took stage in Rome during a concert. So a lot of text messaging going on. The point I'm trying to make is that, well, all these feelings, I think we agree they're important. In fact, that this wonderment that kind of actually enriches our lives. And the claim is that the kinds of technologies that we're going to want to share our lives with, the kinds of things in the future we're going to want to have and carry and interact with, are going to touch us across this full spectrum of life. They're going to certainly help us be productive and efficient, but hopefully they help us sort of daydream and wonder and reflect and kind of always provoke us to have this curiosity. And I kind of want to, there's not sort of one is better than the other or anything, but I think it's important to have that full discussion. So for the sake of that argument, we're sort of trying to have a debate around this idea of wonderment and kind of promoting these kinds of new experiences in cities. The question is kind of, well, how would you actually design, the technologies or what I'm calling sort of instruments to support this kind of wonderment? How would you actually, as a sort of technologist, what kinds of things are you going to do? And in fact, if you look even at the original sort of vision for ubiquitous computing, its founder, Mark Weiser, actually said, he's trying to find a metaphor for something that would remind the value of these kind of invisible phenomena. And he sort of picked childhood, that kind of playful experience. You're kind of building foundations. You're always learning. Things are a little bit mysterious. You're curious about life and how little things fit together and what, causes things to happen. It's that curiosity that I claim that sort of is still with us, and it's something that gives us great pleasure, and we want to have that throughout our lives, and we want to sort of have the technology play a role in that. So what I'm going to do is just really briefly tell you about a couple projects that we did that sort of touch on this wonderment a little bit, and then I'll tell you about a little bit of work we're doing now, and hopefully that'll lead to some discussion. So I'm going to go through them really quickly. These are projects that lapsed over several years, and there's a lot of work involved, numerous studies. So I'm summarizing them in just a couple minutes. So if you have more questions, please ask me about them later, or I'm happy to go over that. So one of them is this idea, it's called Jabberwocky, and the notion that you have familiar strangers. These are people that you see every day in the city, but they're actually strangers to you. And it's actually a real relationship. It's a relationship in which you both mutually agree to ignore each other without any implications of hostility. So if I ignore my friend, it's actually sending them a nonverbal message. I ignore my familiar stranger, that's just how it goes. It's a factor of overloading of cities and population densities and a lot of things. It's one of the reasons we actually look at cities, because a lot of early adoption occurs there because of the population density. And a lot of the infrastructure is in place as well in terms of wireless networking and stuff. Again, I'm going to sort of cut to the chase. This is it's a really fascinating project, but largely what we did is try to reinterpret what this relationship of familiar strangers could possibly be when you look at some kind of a technological manifestation of that. And one of them was to actually look at a mobile phone tool that used Bluetooth as a proximity beacon, so sort of you can uniquely identify people around you and build up different kinds of visualizations. So this is color-coded by the kinds of people that I've encountered just recently around me, green, people that I've seen before or spent co-located time with, or red are sort of new people. Another type of visualization, so this is people that I've encountered at a local coffee shop, Farley's in San Francisco actually, and when I re-encounter them, they appear as little coffee cups on my screen. So it makes me reflect and wonder, oh, why am I'm suddenly in The Haight, or now I'm suddenly in London Heathrow Airport. I'm encountering these people. And the idea is to cause you to have a different viewing, a different mapping, a different kind of experience and reflection of what places are that might actually guide you to move through a city in different ways, or certainly uncover and discover new connections. So we also thought about, well, what if not just the device that you carried around kind of collected the people, but what if a place had sort of a ringtone? The same way, if you think of what is a ringtone, largely it's a personal sort of choice. When you hear somebody, they personally chose that, but it's a public experience. Could the technology, sort of a mobile phone, could it sit there and sort of collect people and not be a person's phone, but could it actually collect sort of the kinds of people that are around or nearby? And imagine everybody here contributed, say, a different sound. I might be a hiccup and someone else might be a dog barking, or all these different kinds of sounds. And would there be a way to kind of mix these or do some kind of a mashup that we could kind of hear a sense or a vibe of the kinds of people that are nearby? And using the similar technique of kind of extracting Bluetooth IDs and doing some manipulation with sounds, we ended up building these kinds of new objects of wonderment. And the idea was, what would these new objects look like? And this is one of them we installed. It was called Hullabaloo, which was largely a speaker. And inside this box on the other side is, you can actually see a little mobile phone in there and this little visualization of what's happening. This one, we did this a number of different times. They run for months and months at a time. To give you an idea, so if you map, say, people as having a bird sound, so to give you some idea of what it's like. So I think you get the idea that essentially you could imagine, could you have this experience where you walk by and you actually can hear this extended viewing of people that passed by 20 minutes ago, 30 minutes ago? Or there's all kinds of ways you can start to play with people giving essentially this gift of sound to this place. And we wanted to just look at how mobile devices could shift and be left onto physical places as well. Another project was Sasha, which decided to take a stand around looking at wireless signals such as cell IDs and GPS as used to triangulate your position on a map, and instead just say, well, how do you move across this kind of artificial geography in a city of cell towers? So obviously some of them are daytime cells that you're in and nighttime cells, and you move through them in some particular fashion. The interesting thing to note is often you could move, say, through a couple cells as you drove home, or maybe you take a subway and you instantly see two cells in series like that without seeing any others. So the geography actually is pretty interesting. I mean, you get things like San Francisco International Airport is directly connected with London Heathrow because I see two cells directly next to each other as I travel. And the idea was, well, just forget about all the geography altogether. This is just me. This is the kind of things I do. This is how my experience of the city is. And then we did a visualization on a mobile phone of that, where the colors are representing the times of days that you kind of encounter these cells, and it's showing you the cell that I'm in and what cells I've come from and things like that. Again, the idea is to sort of prompt you to say, I don't know, what does a road trip to Vegas look like? What does it look like when I walk my dog, or I hang out with my son, or a weekend versus a weekday? So all these things sort of play into leading us to question, what kind of a person am I? Am I kind of a long, stringy person, or am I kind of always in one little area? And we intentionally didn't want to label it with, I'm at the park and this and that. It was just a visualization tool to have you, again, wonder and reflect about your urban life. So we also wanted to look at an object in the city, too. So we picked a very ubiquitous urban object, something you see every day, and that is a public trash can. So this is a project called Jetsam. Believe it or not, I got paid by Intel to look at trash. But pun aside, actually, if you look at, this is an interesting artifact because these objects actually tell you a lot about the kinds of activities that occur around them, the kinds of things that people put into them and leave behind and take. Again, part of a huge study where we actually looked at patterns around trash cans, what went in. We left our own trash around and monitored what happened. There's a long, long story about what happened. A cut to the chase where we basically developed this interactive trash can that you could just throw things in, and it sort of this trash can actually takes a picture of your trash, and it weighs it, and it sort of monitors and it projects out little pieces that have been recently thrown out, and they're sort of drifting away from the can. They're animated and rotating, and all the things that are kind of there that we've played with a number of different variables. But what we did was we took something that was, trash is hidden from us, and we sort of exposed it on the street. Okay, that sounds like a bad idea. But the idea was to change people's perception of what you could do with just something like a trash can. And it created a sort of experience where people could now, it became a public display. We had people come up and throw their double prints in it. There they are on the street. We had graffiti artists throw in graffiti and sort of call their friends over, and it would sort of wander around on the street. So we created this way for you to kind of take a glance and see what kinds of things are people throwing where. They'll have BART tickets there. Maybe people just came from someplace. Is there that's strange. There's not any Starbucks cups. They must have opened up a new cafe. There's all kinds of things you could wonder about pondering with this kind of experience. We had this sort of tongue-in-cheek also scenario where we thought, well, maybe you'd actually text message your trash can, and it would sort of send you pictures back, and you'd have this interaction. It was sort of, okay, you get enough junk mail. I don't think you need your trash can sending you messages. But it was a nice sort of thought experiment. We put it in some publications and some other scenarios people could do. Well, it ends up we weren't that far off, because now, of course, you can now go to garbagescout.com. And you can actually have your trash can send you text messages. You can look at the trash in your neighborhood. There's one in San Francisco as well. In fact, even as recently as a couple weeks ago, the city of San Francisco contacted me, been meeting with them, and they're actually thinking that their Department of Public Works is like, we want some interactive cans. Nothing that sophisticated, but believe it or not, they're already thinking about, we want to sort of have these different kind of experiences and encourage recycling. There's all kinds of things you can do in there. But what I want to draw attention to is this kind of mechanism, this sort of new mashup, this kind of authoring and sharing and remixing of information and data. And really, this kind of metaphor is really, it's extraordinarily successful. It's very popular. And this is one of these typical examples, right? With Flickr, you go out, you take your photos. There's some sharing mechanism. There's some way to kind of remix them and tell new stories and sort of have new sort of messages to convey. There's things, obviously, like podcasting and YouTube. There's a number of these. The list goes on. But if we look back at what's going on with mobile devices and mobile technology, clearly the typical argument that there's going to be more processing. They're going to be sensor-rich, and we already see that in a number of devices, right? There's the Apple iPhone. It has a proximity sensor. It has an accelerometer on it. There's the Nike iPod, which is largely, it's a pedometer with an MP3 player. Samsung came out with a phone that has a 6-axis accelerometer in it. Nokia has sort of a sports phone that's designed to have, it has a pedometer in it that sort of keeps track of calories and things around fitness. If you're not into the fitness, don't worry, you can get the LG Electronics LP4100, which has a breathalyzer in it. So have fun with that. But the point is that there's going to be sensing on these devices. And how are we going to think about the authoring and sharing and remixing with these kinds of technologies? Kind of what I'd say is authoring, sharing, and remixing on the go. So this is now, you're not sort of just sitting at your desktop or your laptop and looking and experiencing these things. You're actually going to be taking personal sensor readings out in the field, so to speak. You're going to be sharing them with other people, and there's going to be some kind of remixing of these kinds of sensor collections. There's all kinds of interesting questions about how that's going to actually develop and work. And actually, largely also inspired by, of course, sadly, the late Richard Newton, who said, now is the era when we're going to apply technologies to transform the world in dramatic ways. And an extraordinary insight, because it seems as if, I mean, I truly have been inspired by him for years, and he was very clear in the way that he thought about, the technologies are sort of there for us to create these really ripe new opportunities, not kind of incremental things, but really transform the way people think about computing. And one of them is this idea, and this is what I'm sort of talking about, is this participatory urbanism. So the idea to really empower people to participate and become active in measuring and sort of remixing and sharing information about their everyday life and experiences. So this is the open creation, adoption, and remixing of new or existing urban technologies marked by requiring or involving participation, especially affording the opportunity for individual citizen participation, sharing, and voice. Now, a lot of this actually is building on the work that has come out of Berkeley and UCLA and MIT, where it was looking at sensor networks, which kind of empowered scientists in the field that didn't normally have access to sensing technology to do really fundamentally new research with sensor nets. And similarly, there's been a lot of work looking at, well, what happens when it's not giving these devices to just scientists, but you actually are giving this to everyday citizens. And there's been a large amount of this work in a number of places. I mean, UCLA certainly has been promoting this participatory sensing project to look at how people are going to, what are the mechanisms and the sort of infrastructure that's going to need to be in place to actually enable people to participate in these kinds of authoring, sharing, and remixing experiences. And if you think about it as sort of engineers and computer scientists, we really didn't do anything yet, and there's already all of this stuff that's sort of grassroots movements that just happens, right? There was People Power 2. I don't know if people missed this, but this was a 4-day sort of very popular revolution that peacefully overthrew the Philippine president, Joseph Estrada. And this was largely driven by people using text messaging to just change and sort of mobilize forces. There's the Orange Revolution, the Ukraine, after this sort of very sort of fraudulent election situation there. Again, text messaging played a huge role in mobilizing people. Back home, more locally, of course, there's Text Mob, which just was used largely at the Republican National Convention, again, for people to kind of motivate and drive their own mechanism to kind of coordinate and gather and plan using mobile devices. Then, of course, there's other things. There's Mr. Wen's unfortunate run-in with Dan Hoyt, where he just was on a New York subway exposing himself. And, she took a photo of him. She said, I've had it with this. And she uploaded it to Flickr. And people said, yeah, this is not acceptable. And in fact, now there's Hollerback, and there's Hollerback NYC. And you can actually go and sort of, largely women, but people in general are empowered to say, I don't like what I see here. I want to say something about it. I'm not going to go through the typical mechanism. I'm going to go down and file a police report and tell you kind of what the person looked like. Here it is. This is what happened to me. What do you think of that? And it was largely successful. I mean, he basically got into a lot of trouble. And even more locally, things like ParkScan This is an effort in San Francisco. If you see something broken in the park or you don't like, or why is the drinking fountain not working, take a picture of it. You say, fix this. My park is not working. Another sort of empowering of people to participate in this. And of course, we're familiar with things, even just participatory journalism. This is a photo from the London bombings where we had this kind of instant kind of experience of what was going on. And on a sort of more recent time note, Michael Bloomberg, as mayor of New York, said, you know what, this 911 system is really antiquated. We're going to add text messaging, picture messaging, all these kinds of things. So now when there's an incident or something happens, we'll have all kinds of media to kind of have this experience rather than just some phone calls. So, great. But what happens when we put much more sensing into these kinds of tools? So right now, this is essentially camera phones with text messaging. What kind of sensing will there be? Well, there's a little bit of a taxonomy, for one. I mean, there's the things we're talking about where they're onboard sensing on the device. But there's also things that, sensors that you'll wear, right? So things that might monitor, heart rate or different fitness levels. There might be sensors that you kind of detach and leave behind to measure some phenomenon and just retrieve later as you walk by or scatter them around. There might be sensors in the infrastructure that are a little bit more reliable. Maybe they're powered. Maybe they provide some kind of calibration mechanism. What we're trying to say is we obviously need to move beyond the mobile phone, as a sort of personal communication tool. And really what we're talking about is a supercomputer radio station with sensors, right? That's what this is. It's a measurement instrument, okay? And it is measuring stuff. Actually, if we look at our phone today, we get some information. Everybody's phone has a little bit of environmental data on it. Here it is. This is telling you essentially a signal-to-noise ratio of a very narrow slice of the electromagnetic spectrum. That is what your mobile phone is telling you in all of its power and energy. This is the thing that it is telling you about the world around you. It's kind of sad. It should be doing a lot more than this. It should really be, if we want to really think about empowering people to, create and report and do, measure noise pollution and sort of just generally, why can't we sort of become more involved in things such as, rather than sort of relying on civic government to tell us, there's no noise problem in your neighborhood. I'm like, there is. An airplane just flew over. I want to measure it. This truck just went by my office. The same way we saw with the previous kinds of systems. How can we basically design them? Now, there's a couple fronts that we're kind of personally trying to attack this on and try to develop tools. One of them is just how can we empower people to actually build and construct and make new kinds of sensing devices with their mobile phone. So very much in the same spirit as we saw things like Lego Mindstorms, which was a way to kind of easily kit together and easily program little sensors and actuators. We want to tap into that hacker, builder, maker, do-it-yourself aesthetic. The same way people were hacking their iPods apart and, of course, fighting their Roombas together, right? Nobody, you can't just buy a car, right? We've got to kind of remix our car and, do all kinds of things. It's very much about personalization, but it's also about empowering people to feel as if they become active authors in building new kinds of experiences. The difference is we can talk about building systems, not sort of, we're going to build this for the thousands of people that will use our tool, but what about the thousands of different tools that sort of smaller groups would want to build and use? So, what would bike messengers really want mobile devices to do? What would urban gardeners want it to do? What about skateboarders? Or the list kind of goes on. Maybe from a business argument, you don't really build things and sell to small little groups, but you do empower small groups to build up a richer sort of spectrum of ideas, and that's what we're largely going after. And one of them is we've sort of worked on easily attaching lots of different sensors. So some of the things that are already on board, of course, like a microphone and camera, but things like analog and digital I/O that we've been driven largely through a Bluetooth piece of hardware that allows us to talk to them, and then different actuators and driving motors. And can we actually, what we've done is sort of put together a sort of visual toolkit, very much like things like Max MSP, for those of you who are familiar with that, that allows everyday people. The key here is to really make it so everyday people can use these tools. and sort of output some Python code so that it'll execute on a phone. The idea is that you just need sort of a Python interpreter to kind of use this kind of system. Now, when you get people basically using just gathering all kinds of data, using these measurement instruments, if you get sort of thousands and thousands of millions of people using this, you get all kinds of big problems. There's lots of good work in here, dissertations, good stuff. So things like, how is the hardware going to be extensible? How are we going to build open platforms for people to build off of? How are we going to deal with software for sharing and things like, virtual machines, and how do we deal with power management? How are people, no one's going to want to upload this information if there's no sort of privacy guarantees, and how are we going to ensure that? How are we going to authenticate this data is really valid? How are we going to calibrate all these sensors? These aren't sort of scientists in the field with the knowledge of using these kind of tools. These are just everyday people, and these devices are in and out of handbags and pockets and subways. And how do we even know what sensors we want to use? And how can we do some kind of cool things? Like now suddenly we can do super sampling. We have all kinds of data about one particular intersection all day long where we never had that before. So we're tackling that now with a particular problem we're looking at, which is the air quality and sort of air pollution topic. Now, the World Health Organization has said, there's 4.6 million people that die directly from essentially air quality problems. That's more people than die from automobile accidents. So this is a huge deal. Not to mention, I don't know if people caught the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Control, but surprisingly, there seems to be some global warming going on. We may want to look into it. So there's a lot of things that sort of motivate this. In fact, did anyone catch the air quality today? I got it for you. It's 45, just so you know. I looked it up this morning. This is what the government tells you about the air. It's 45 today. For reference, 50 is people that are essentially so elderly or sort of young children should not be outside doing vigorous exercise. But it's 45, so we're okay. So the bigger index is worse or better? I'm sorry? The larger number is worse. Yeah. Okay, so what is this actually? It's actually a thing that's called the Air Quality Index, and it's composed of sort of a moving average weighted of a bunch of different sort of chemicals and things that are measured, sulfur dioxide, carbon dioxide, things like that, particulate matter. So things like sulfur dioxide, obviously, this comes largely from coal burning plants and also from, industrial processes and from emissions from vehicles. And of course, it's associated with all kinds of cardiovascular disease and lung problems. Carbon monoxide, this is a colorless, odorless gas. Actually, sometimes up to 95% of the carbon monoxide emissions are coming, in cities at least, are coming from automobiles. Again, reduced dexterity, all kinds of problems. Nitrogen dioxide, this is when fuel is burnt at high temperatures. You get this from largely automobiles. And even in very small quantities, like 4 parts per million, this essentially can do things like anesthetize the nose and sort of cause you to have prolonged exposure. Ozone is another one. This isn't actually something that's given off, but it's an artifact of sort of the sun interacting with other matter and also with sort of organic compounds in the atmosphere. But similarly, also dangerous. And the other one is particulate matter. So these are the small little particles that are in the air of various sizes. And you have things like, largely sometimes they're environmental, so it'll be a forest fire or dust storm. When's the last time that we had for the Bay Area, we had a kind of spare the air announcement? Does anyone remember? 2 weeks ago? Last night was a spare the air night. Okay? Obviously the word's not getting out. It's largely because people were burning fires in their fireplaces and things. But yeah, there's problems all the time. I think it largely goes unnoticed. In fact, if you think, this is the mechanism that's used to measure this now. So this is San Francisco, Bay Area, 7 million people. This is the 6th largest consolidated metropolitan area in the U.S. There's obviously a number of parks, airports, all kinds of roadways and things. There's 6 measurement stations for particulate matter. There they are. That's how they compose a number for everyone. We have a little bit more for things like ozone, and there's actually 21. But this is not touching on the dynamic range of what's really happening. It's also, we're completely not talking about indoor air pollution, which is where people go, where these measurement instruments go, but where this is making no comment about. In fact, the indoor air pollution is, I think it's around 1.6 million people die a year from indoor air pollution. So that's like a person every 20 seconds. And this is actually a picture of just moving around with the sensor around Las Vegas, Nevada, measuring ozone. You can see there's a lot of dynamic range. This is 2 different days. It's like there's things happening in here. This is very much some dynamic issues around what we think we can recover in terms of people participating in measuring this. And this is our kit that we've been sending out. This is the current sort of setup of, there's a mobile phone in there for reference, but the others are sensors for sulfur dioxide and nitrogen dioxide and carbon monoxide. There's a GPS unit. The idea is to essentially, we're running experiments with a bunch of different groups to understand how they actually will collect this data, and also interview them about issues of privacy and things like that with using this. And we're doing this here in the US, but also in other countries. And the idea is to sort of try to understand, which sensors matter and how they can be used and how they can be calibrated and things like that. Of course, what we're really interested in is putting this and engineering something onto a mobile device. And this is actually R.J. Haneke, who's here at Berkeley, has been leading a large part of this effort to say how you actually, this is this carbon monoxide sensor, so if you start to say, well, could you really get this on a phone? Well, there it is. Okay, there's a carbon monoxide sensor. Very low power. They're micro fuel cells to actually measure information and data. So a lot of this is ongoing projects that we're doing. I want to say something about just how people might visualize this in terms of looking at the kind of experience of what you might view. And we already talked about how people would measure the kinds of people nearby or the environmental conditions. One thing is, well, you might not want to just share this information because it's interesting. This is very interesting, this different kind of display technology, this visualization. So here's a picture of San Francisco. And this might just be on my screen, it's just a picture, but maybe I know sort of secret information about this. We're calling this sort of a personal steganographic visualization. So there's information hidden in here that I only know about. So the little birds tell me that there's some familiar strangers nearby. And then there's no one really on the road at all, but maybe a little while later I glance down and, oh, okay, these are people I know are nearby. Or similarly, maybe there's, this, I don't know if people could see, but there's a little crane now up there. There's some kind of event happening in the city, or maybe my friends are eating, or there's all kinds of information you can embed in here. Maybe they're quite literal. The air quality's bad. But we've thought about ways of playing with kind of trying to output this information. And we've also looked at an iconographic version of this. So as you move into the city, you kind of know where you are, maybe the kind of pastoral landscape gives way to some kind of a city representation. Again, you see the birds and the people. Maybe you're later in the city, you see these kinds of visualizations. And also maybe you go underground, right? And you sort of still have this representation that things are happening. You're kind of in the midst of it. But I want to kind of come back and say the sort of takeaways, the things that I want to kind of recall and sort of push on is this idea about wonderment, this idea that it's important for us to try to think of applications and tools that kind of help us reflect about society and our world around us and our connections to people and place. And also this idea of participation as being a really prime driver in having people rethink their relationship with technology and mobile devices and their relationship with others around them. So hopefully let's participate together. So at that, I'll leave it for questions, but I thank you for your time.
Yeah, I noticed that there's a connection between a number of different things that you've talked about. You talk about wonderment, and you come from John Caney's group, and you talk about art, and you're using art in some of your work. And the connection I see is that efficiency, which you said is not really what you're about, is in the what might be called the outer success worldview. It's the business worldview, it's the worldview of war and competition. And that's all fine and good, but there's another level of participation which is really about community and about everybody playing together. And what I see is that that is the area that you're trying to engage in. And I think it's interesting to note that the funding sources for this kind of work may be different than the people who are interested in funding things that are efficient or empower them to dominate someone else.
Right. I mean, there's definitely a power issue you could play into this. I mean, a couple of things also on the art issue. We certainly do, we're not making art projects, but I mean, I'm interested in the way artists view the world and the way that they experiment and sort of the kinds of ways that they are mechanisms they use to actually engage with society or place. So we do employ some of those tactics for sure. But yeah, the power issue, the funding source, it's actually interesting because obviously, I'll put my Intel hat on, I'm employed by a major corporation. But they actually, and they get this. I mean, I sort of tell them about this, and they get the idea that ultimately they know that they need to sort of rethink the way people are going to relate to mobile devices. I mean, okay, they're a manufacturing company, they want to sell product, right? Let's face it, they want to sell silicon. So if there are new mechanisms that allow people to experience, if you're going to go buy a mobile device and you have a sort of tool that has this richer way of interacting or experiencing, that's kind of value add. So that's my little business angle. But I think that there's going to be a huge shift in the way people even interact with purchasing and dealing with technology. I mean, you're not going to just go to the store, buy it, set it on your dresser, or interact with it. You're going to sort of customize it. Same way open source software really customized operating systems. I see that happening in the sort of hardware realm too.
No?
Let me just make one. I'm going to make a little announcement since I have a second. We have an open house, actually, at the Intel Berkeley lab. It's March 22nd, and I believe it's sort of 1 to 2 or 3 in the afternoon. But everyone, it's open to the public. I invite you to come down. Those who don't know, it's in the Power Bar building right downtown Berkeley. Ask me later. Please feel free to take these handouts about sort of some of the projects.
I also just wanted to mention that next week's research exchange will be in, I think, 3110 Echeverry Hall. So if you come here expecting a great talk and a great lunch, you're going to be disappointed. You're going to be shunted over to there. So just go to Echeverry next week. So thank you again, Dr. Paulos.
Great, thanks. I don't know if I answered that, really.